Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1121 for August 10th, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
A fair statement, frustrated and exasperated because we had high hopes in the broad agreement that was announced between the U.S. and the EU about 10 days ago. It would already include 0% tariffs for both spirits and wine, as a matter of fact.
President Trump's widespread trade tariffs took effect on Thursday, and whiskey industry groups are trying to carve out exemptions for distilled spirits. Scotch Whisky Association Chief Executive Mark Kent and Distilled Spirits Council CEO Chris Swanger met Thursday in Washington, and we'll hear from both of them on this week's WhiskyCast in depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey, it's Gabriel from Dewar's Whiskey. Here's a quick tip. Whenever you're pouring great whiskey, especially something like Dewar's 12-year, don't overthink it. All you need is a few glasses and a couple of people worth sharing it with. The rest takes care of itself. Back in a bit.
Crafted with time, shaped by nature, perfected by generations. From Yamazaki to Hibiki to Hakushu, every drop of House of Suntory whiskey is a reflection of where it comes from. House of Suntory, this is Japanese whiskey.
Enjoy responsibly. Suntory Whiskey Single Malt and Blended Japanese Whiskey. 43% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2025 Suntory Global Spirits Import Company, Chicago, Illinois.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. A Tennessee federal judge is expected to rule this week on a bank's request to name a receiver for Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey and the Nearest Green Distillery, after the companies defaulted on $108 million in loans. The lawsuit names both companies and owners Fawn and Keith Weaver, who are blaming Uncle Nearest's former chief financial officer for overstating the value of the distillery's barrel inventory by $21 million. Let's get some local perspective now from two reporters who have been covering the case. Tabitha Moore is the editor and publisher of the Lynchburg Times, and Dwayne Sherrill is the editor of the Tullahoma News. So how did we get to this point with Uncle Nearest? Was there talk around Moore County and Shelbyville of financial problems?
Obviously, as the editor of the Lynchburg Times, I am very familiar and have lots of sources and friends at both Jack Daniel's and also at Nearest Green, to be honest. And I started hearing grumblings about unpaid invoices with vendors probably about 6 or 8 months ago from folks in Bedford County. I have never heard anything in Moore County about it, but that's when it first officially got on my radar. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we'd heard there were some unpaid bills going around.
Yeah.
I guess we could just put it that way.
Yeah.
And then comes word that the bank is coming in for $108 million.
And that grows by $28,000 a day right now, too. So, yes.
Dwayne, you were in the hearing yesterday or Thursday. What was the outcome of the hearing?
There was actually no outcome except they pledged by the federal judge that he would have an order down pretty soon. He said there will not be a ruling today, but it will be quick in coming. The only things they decided to actually do was to ensure that the collateral stays where it is in the interim. So barrels or things like that don't disappear, anything like that. And there's talk about maybe doing a quasi-gag order to stop both sides from talking to the media while they're talking to each other, trying to negotiate some kind of settlement.
What did Keith Weaver have to say in the hearing Thursday?
Regarding just the bottom line, his statement was that Nearest Green's doing well as far as markets. They're selling out in some markets. They're improving in a lot of different markets, Boston and in Texas, he said specifically. However, his take is it's more of a cash flow problem rather than a solvency problem. And the real back and forth during this hearing was whether they wanted a receiver to be over nearest green. And of course, the defense argued that that would cause credibility problems. It would cause image problems, and they didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep Fawn Weaver as the face, and they were afraid that that would cause a problem with the receivership.
But they admitted that Keith Weaver admitted on the stand that they are in default.
Yes, on cross-examination. Although his own attorney also kind of admitted to the judge that, yes, we're in default because they haven't made the last $10 million payment. They're not going to make next week's $10 million payment either. So, and by law, they're in default.
Tabitha, what's the take in the community about all this?
So I'm going to need to give you a little bit of background about Lynchburg for you to understand my answer to this fully. So the Dan Call Farm, which is the location that nearest mentored Jack Daniels and taught him how to make whiskey, is right in the valley below the ridge where I grew up. I played as a child in the footprint of that old still. There's a pool at the Dan Call house. It was owned by the McGee's at the time, and I swam in that pool my entire childhood, okay? Some of the Green family members are some of my best friends. I grew up with them in high school. I've known them in the community. And what a lot of people who are outside of Lynchburg don't understand is that the Green family is just as admired in Lynchburg as the Motlow family is, which is the family that Jack Daniels, the nephews that Jack Daniels left his distillery from. So everybody at the distillery is fairly tight-lipped about that. I haven't heard anybody from the distillery, either in Lynchburg or in Louisville, say anything to me about it. There were some grumblings that, some bills weren't getting paid, and people were sort of, on social media how people pile on. So there was a little bit of piling on social media, but not that much general conversation. Everybody kind of knew, and I think we were just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop, so to speak.
What happens if Nearest Green goes into receivership?
It will be run by a receiving team, which will be a management team. They would first make sure that the inventory is stable for the collateral for the bank. That's the number one thing. They would try to get it running smoother. They would try to make it more profitable, but they would be management in charge. Fawn could still stay CEO and the face of, and that's something they spoke about in the hearing, that just because a receivership takes over does not mean that that Fawn cannot still be the face of. They would want her to, I would think.
Fawn has spoken out on social media about this, and she's sort of the only comment we've gotten from Nearest Green so far. What did she have to say?
So I don't know that I'm the only news media that they've officially spoken to, but Keith Weaver spoke to me on the record right after the case came out. I spoke to Fawn briefly as she was getting on a plane, and she asked me to reach out to Keith for an official statement. He spoke to me for about 30 minutes on the phone, and what he said to me was that the suit was demonstrably false. He said there were some inaccurate claims, specifically around the timing of the payments and using corporate resources for personal gain. He also felt a little salty about it, as if it was a little bit personal, because they named both Fawn and Keith personally and assumed it's not just against Nearest Green Inc. He, again, told me exactly what Dwayne heard in court, which is, they've posted double-digit growth in the past 52 weeks. They're doing well. He also said that he thought the timing of the suit was interesting because notably they've bought that house in Martha's Vineyard, and in August they do the big garden party. And he described to me that the purchase of the Martha's Vineyard house was very strategic because at that garden party, they could be in front of spirits buyers from across the U.S. all in one place rather than having to travel coast to coast to talk to these people. So he felt like the timing of it. I mean, when I asked him if he would go so far as to say sabotage, he was kind of like, yeah. And he also told me that he sees the distillery as a bridge builder, that the story of Nearest is what drove them to start that distillery, that the friendship between Jack and Nearest. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that Nearest was much older than Jack Daniel. So Nearest would have been more like an older uncle to Jack Daniel than they would have been contemporaries. They were not the same age. And so he thinks that basically he ended the call with saying that he felt as if that story of cooperation and shared creativity between a formerly enslaved Black man and a white entrepreneur during that time was a story worth telling and worth protecting, basically, is what he told me.
So the company line is that they want to continue going on, even though they admitted yesterday in the court hearing that they did discuss Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Yes. The attorney working for him is fairly new. I think he's only been retained for about a week. So there have been some quick discussions back and forth, and they really want to try to negotiate and settle and try to get things back on the track rather than have somebody else take over in receivership or, bankruptcy, which would work a lot like receivership. I mean, they would put somebody over it to make sure that they safeguard the collateral and things like that.
Anything else you can add that I didn't ask about?
It was a 2-hour hearing, 30 minutes more than the judge wanted. He was not happy about them going over by the 30 minutes because he put it on the heel of the docket. I suspect we're going to hear something first of the week. I wouldn't think he would let it go too deep. I'm pretty sure what's on his mind. So,
what do you think is going to happen?
Receivership. They've got every reason in the world to ask for that because of the collateral and the $21 million discrepancy between the barrels and what was reported earlier. So I'm pretty sure he'll go with that. I could be wrong, but it just seemed he was asking. He even asked the defense lawyer if they had a problem with the receiving team that they had set. They were actually on the front row at the hearing, the proposed receiving team, and they don't want the team from Texas that the bank wants. They want a team out of Colombia if they do go into receivership. So the judge went so far to ask. He said, "Now, if I do this, do you have a problem with this receiving team?"
I should note that Keith Weaver originally agreed to talk to me after the hearing, but then did not respond to my emails. Keith is the CEO of the Uncle Nearest Distillery, while Fawn Weaver is the CEO of the Uncle Nearest whiskey brand. She was in Florida Thursday on a sales trip and did not attend the court hearing. We'll keep you posted on this story as it develops. In other news, 2025 was a challenging year for Diageo, but the world's largest spirits company reported a 1.7% increase in net sales for the fiscal year ending June 30th. Profits were down by 1%, with lagging sales for Johnnie Walker and Bulleit Bourbon, to name a few. Crown Royal posted higher than expected sales, along with Don Julio Tequila, driving a 1.6% growth in U.S. sales. Diageo executives are forecasting single-digit profit growth for fiscal 2026, despite the impact of tariffs and a challenging consumer environment. The Crown Royal results were largely based on consumer demand for the new Crown Royal Blackberry expression, and now Jack Daniel's is jumping on the Blackberry bandwagon. Its new Jack Daniel's Blackberry blends the traditional Old No. 7 whiskey with blackberries. It's bottled at 35% ABV, making it a liqueur instead of a whiskey on the label, and will sell for $21.99 a bottle. I'll have tasting notes for it soon at whiskeycast.com. Glengoyne is jumping on the Mizunara Oak bandwagon for the third release in its Oak Masters series. The 16-year-old Glengoyne Mizunara Oak spent 6 years in the Japanese oak before bottling at cask strength, 53.4% ABV. It'll go on sale this Wednesday through the Glengoyne website, distillery shop, and select retailers. Suntory pioneered the use of Mizunara oak in the 1950s and is releasing 2 new Yamazaki single malts matured in Mizunara oak. The 18 and 25-year-old Yamazaki Mizunara Expressions will be available in limited amounts. There's no word on pricing. Heaven Hill has unveiled this year's Parker's Heritage Collection whiskey. It's an 11-year-old blended American whiskey made from 3 component whiskeys, a 15-year-old wheated bourbon, an 11-year-old straight corn whiskey, and a 12-year-old whiskey made from rye and malt. It's bottled at barrel-proof 61.25% ABV and will sell for $179.99 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. As with previous Parker's Heritage Collection releases, part of the proceeds will be donated to ALS research and patient care in honor of the late Parker Bean. And finally, Sazerac's A. Smith Bowman Distillery is wrapping up its experimental oak series with a 12-year-old Hungarian oak matured whiskey. It follows up on the previous French oak and American oak releases and will go on sale via an online lottery that begins Monday and runs through next Monday. We have a link for more details in the show notes for this episode at whiskeycast.com. That's also where you can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The American Whiskey Show is set for August 23rd in Sydney, Australia. The American Distilling Institute has its annual Craft Spirits Conference on the 25th and 26th in San Antonio, Texas. The Whiskey Exchange has a barrel-top tasting of world whiskeys at its London Bridge shop on the 25th in London. Join us the weekend of September 5th through the 7th for special coverage from the Kentucky Bourbon Festival in Bardstown, Kentucky. Joel Harrison has a new book coming out, The World Whiskey Tour, and he'll be leading a tasting at the Whiskey Exchange Great Portland Street shop in London on September 10th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskeycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. Japanese whiskey began with Shinjiro Tori's vision to reflect the true nature and spirit of Japan. The House of Suntory was founded on these principles, guided by generations of craftsmanship that have transformed time, nature, and precision into something greater than the sum of its parts. Pure waters from the mountains of Hakushu, Mizunara oak shaped by decades of patience, a blending philosophy rooted in harmony. These aren't just techniques, they're a way of thinking, a quiet pursuit of balance and depth. From Yamazaki to Hakushu to Hibiki, every whiskey is a reflection of where it comes from and the hands that shape it. House of Suntory, the founding house of Japanese whiskey.
Enjoy responsibly. Suntory Whiskey Single Malt and Blended Japanese Whiskey. 43% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2025 Suntory Global Spirits Import Company, Chicago, Illinois.
The Toasts Not Tariffs Coalition of spirits industry groups sent a letter this week to President Trump telling him that the trade tariffs he's imposing on countries around the world could have a $2 billion impact on the U.S. hospitality industry and cost some 25,000 jobs. Tariffs were also the key topic Thursday when Distilled Spirits Council CEO Chris Swanger hosted his counterpart from the Scotch Whisky Association, Mark Kent. The two organizations have been acting in lockstep on the tariff issue, and both CEOs spent some time with me Thursday on a Zoom call. So how symbolic is this relationship between the two organizations?
Well, I would say, speaking it from the perspective of the SWA, there's a new word which has entered into my vocabulary over the past few months, which is symbiotic. The relationship with Discus and the other US trade associations basically mirrors the relationship between our two industries. We have a lot of partnership going on, just as in the industries, we have a lot of shared investment, we have a lot of shared members. We share the barrel trade, whereby we in Scotland buy anything up to about $300 million worth of barrels every year from the US. So it's only right that we share a very common position with Discus on most things. And obviously the focus at the moment is on zero for zero. And that's why Chris was over in the UK, in Scotland, and just recently, for us to actually make that point, standing side by side, literally standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, to point out the economic benefits of this, which has served us so well for many years.
It's been since 1997 that we haven't had tariffs, or zero for zero tariffs on on distilled spirits. What does the imposition of tariffs today do to the industry on both sides of the ocean?
Well, I would say, Mark, and you'll remember this, for about a 3-year period when the U.S. was in a tit for tat back between the U.S. and the EU, when the UK was part of the EU, and then the UK following Brexit. Unfortunately, there were tariffs on American whiskey, and there were tariffs on single malt Scotch. And the result was a lose-lose proposition for the greater industry and for American and UK consumers. So, and as a result of that, we know without question the value proposition of economic growth and the betterment for both industries across the pond in a marketplace where there are no trade barriers and zero for zero tariffs. And that's what Discus and the Scotch Whisky Association are working on to help the Trump administration certainly understand the risk to the American economy, the risk to our great industry and job growth and economic vitality if our industry gets caught up in tariffs again. And we've suffered a little bit about the lack of predictability of where this may head, and that's why Mark and I are working so closely together to educate both governments and make sure that we speak with a loud but one voice.
Mark?
Yeah, I think that's right. When you look at the respective markets, Mark, the US is our biggest market, so it's about 20% of our overall exports, and it's particularly important for our smaller members, our smaller distillers. It's often seen as a breakthrough market, so they are particularly affected. Having said that, as I'm sure you know, the UK is the third biggest market for US spirits exports. So there's a shared interest in getting a deal which works, and there's not a hair's breadth between Chris and myself when I'm making that point in the UK, and I know Chris is making that point in the US as well, because the economic facts and figures speak for themselves. As Chris said, when we were hit with tariffs before, as both sides we were collateral damage to an unrelated dispute, it was a very costly one for our industry, and of course not just the industry, but then that affects the supply chains, right from the farmers who grow the barley straight through to hospitality, tourism, and other related sectors. So I'm sure you know, the Scotch whisky industry supports 41,000 jobs in Scotland and 66,000 in the wider UK. So it's important that those who are taking decisions, in my case in Scotland and in the UK, are aware of the importance of the economic contribution of the industry.
Mark, give me a sense of what 10% tariffs do to your members.
Well, I mean, the ones who have the least bandwidth will be hit hardest. So I mentioned about the smaller members, but in terms of monetary value, Mark, we estimate that it's costing us £4 million a week, which then translates to about £200 million a year. And I think on current exchange rate, that's about $250 million. So it is significant.
Chris, you used some of the strongest language I've ever heard you use in a news release the other day, calling the European Union tariffs exasperating and extremely frustrating, if I get the quote right there. How frustrated are you?
Look, Discus appreciates and understands the big issues that the President of the United States is trying to grapple with. For American jobs, American manufacturing, for national security purposes. I mean, the list is long. But we're very, very excited about the agreement. I think it was 2 Sundays ago that was announced between the U.S. and the EU on a trade deal. And since then, and we're waiting on the framework of that agreement being published, we believe it is imperative that both governments agree to 0 for 0 tariffs. For all the reasons that we've talked about, Mark, we're distinctive products, our economies are intertwined together. We have thrived as a result of zero trade barriers and so forth. So exasperated, yes, because there's a lot coming at the industry, and we all know that. And we want to make sure that a great American success story that has happened here over the past 25 years continues. And a part of that is predictability. And now, any given day now, it's been reported that a published framework of the US EU deal will be published. And we are advocating strongly that ultimately in that agreement, it showcases 0 for 0 tariffs. And that's the exact same way Discus and SWA are working together. We want to make sure ultimately both governments agree for 0 for 0 tariffs. And we do not get caught up in some other possible negotiation about some other industry that's not directly relevant to us. And that's why we're just being so tenacious, and aggressive is a strong term, but it's an incumbent upon us to speak loud and be resilient in our advocacy. So yes, it was a fair statement, frustrated and exasperated, because we had high hopes in the broad agreement that was announced between the US and the EU about 10 days ago. It would already include 0 for 0 tariffs for both spirits and wine, as a matter of fact. And the governments haven't gotten down to those details yet, but we hope it includes that whenever that framework is published. And if it's not included, we're going to be that much more resilient and tenacious to educate members of the Trump administration and the EU. And there's no light between us and the EU spirits industry as well. We're working just as closely together as Discus is with the Scotch Whisky Association. As a matter of fact, Mark, I spent a couple of days in Scotland about 2 weeks ago, and then Mark flies over last night, and we show up this morning. We're wearing the same tie. Tie. We didn't have a.
We're on the same level.
100%.
Very symbiotic.
We noticed that this morning. So, look, we know and appreciate it's an anxious time for everybody in the industry, but please know that we are doing everything we can to fight through, fight for, and advocate for this awesome industry that contributes so much to the economies of the US and the UK economies. And we're not going to give up, and we're going to be tenacious.
Mark, President Trump met with First Minister Sweeney while he was over in Scotland a few days ago, and they did discuss Scotch whiskey and some sort of carve out for Scotch whiskey on the tariff front with the UK trade deal. Are you confident that some sort of carve out can be accomplished?
Well, I mean, I would just echo what Chris has just said. I mean, yeah, the First Minister did indeed raise the question of Scotch whisky with the President, and it was highlighted in the media as well. And Chris did an interview with the BBC, which was leading the news. So it's definitely an issue which is on the agenda, and we're grateful that it's going to be looked at now. I think, speak in a similar vein as Chris, there's a lot of things going on at the moment, but it's our job to keep it on the agenda, and that's what we're going to be doing with the UK government and the Scottish government to ensure that that the contribution of the industry to the UK economy is recognised, and the fact that we need some support now because. Just as in other countries around the world, it's a challenging time. We're a resilient industry, but it's not just tariffs we're facing. We're facing domestic issues, regulation, a very high tax burden. So it's a moment to reflect on the contribution which the industry makes to the UK and Scottish economies, and the fact that it needs to be giving some support in the short term to ensure that continue to play an important part.
Let me pose a question that comes from the average consumer point of view. Why should we be concerned about tariffs as a consumer?
Well, I think ultimately, again, give an example. From 1997 to June 2018, there were 0 tariffs between the US and the EU. And the UK was part of the EU at the time. There was 450% growth across the Atlantic for our two great industries in the United States and the EU. Ultimately, it's going to have an impact. It's going to have a ripple effect on our agriculture partners, our distributor partners, our retailer partners, and ultimately, it's going to impose on the ultimate cost to the consumer as well. And, it has a ripple effect. So with that, this industry relishes for moments to compete for sip and trial and bring in consumers together. And tariffs on our industry is nothing but an impediment to that.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially it now. We export to 180 different markets around the world at any one point, but the US is our most important market. And as Chris said, it's not just the effect that it has on our industry itself; it's the effect on consumers, on wider hospitality, tourism, and our supply chain. Starting off with the folks who plant the barley and reap the barley, the folks who craft the barrels. There's a lot of people whose livelihoods depend on our industries on each side of the Atlantic.
I think that about does it. Anything else either of you can add that I didn't ask about?
Of course, I would say this, Mark, but for all, certainly the U.S. listeners, please follow this issue closely and in due course, depending on how things unfold. We may reach out and ask for support from a grassroots perspective, engaging with members of Congress, engaging with Spirits United, which is our grassroots platform. So be fully aware and rest assured, we're giving everything we've got to advocate for this great industry.
Mark?
I think what Chris said for the US goes equally in the UK. We're a global industry, but we are based in rural communities across Scotland, and we are part of the UK's biggest food and drink export. So we will continue to make make the case in the UK, just as Chris is continuing to make the case in the US.
Thanks to Scotch Whisky Association CEO Mark Kent and Distilled Spirits Council CEO Chris Swanger for joining me on this week's WhiskyCast in depth. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with this year's 19th edition of the Parker's Heritage Collection from Heaven Hill. It's an 11-year-old blended American whiskey bottled at 61.25% ABV. The nose has touches of baking spices, pipe tobacco, leather, honey, and oak. The taste is spicy and bold, with black pepper and cinnamon notes balanced by cherries, leather, and honey. Adding some water dampens the spices and adds a touch of chocolate. The finish is long and spicy, and I'm scoring the 2025 Parker's Heritage Collection whiskey a 93. Frey Ranch has a new 5-grain bourbon out now that includes oats along with the standard corn, rye, wheat, and malted barley. It's bottled at 65.1% ABV, and the nose is dusty and dry with touches of roasted corn, honey, allspice, and wheat bread. The taste is spicy with cinnamon, black pepper, and allspice, complemented by honey and vanilla, and the finish is long and spicy with a touch of oak. I'm scoring the Frey Ranch 5-grain bourbon a 92. Proof and Wood Spirits has released a new version of its Tumble and Dice rye whiskey. This one is finished for a year in Laird's Apple Brandy barrels and is bottled at 59.45% ABV. The nose has touches of apple cobbler, cinnamon, honey, vanilla, and milk chocolate. The taste has baking spices on top of red apples, along with vanilla, milk chocolate, and honey. The finish, long and spicy. And I'm scoring the Tumble and Dice Apple Brandy finish from Proof and Wood Spirits a 92. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of more than 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskeycast.com.
Throughout the years, Dewar's has created some incredible whiskeys, but our new Dewar's 12-year-old, that one's a personal favorite. It's the kind of scotch that earns praise from the pros, but still feels right at home in the middle of a good night with friends. Every pour opens up with notes of vanilla, toffee, baking spice, and a smooth oak finish. It's rich, it's approachable, and it has a way of bringing people together, whether it's around the table, the fireplace, or just wherever the night happens to take you. Look, the glasses may hold the whiskey, but the whiskey, that's what holds the moment. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about this week in our community segment. After I posted the news about Uncle Nearest in the app the other day, Brian Redden posted this comment. Wow, hard to believe a brand that's successfully appearing on its face was that deep underwater. That's a big problem. Rick at the Whiskey Zone also thought, wow, I'm sorry to hear that mismanagement might tarnish the reputation of what Fawn Weaver has accomplished at Nearest Green. But I'm also not passing any early judgment, and will let the story play out to its proper conclusion. Juan Cruz posted, what a cluster foxtrot. No matter the outcome, allegations true or not, the damage to the company will be significant and long-term. And Tyrone Cote added this, it's a difficult time to refinance loans, and the allegations of misstatements are troublesome. However, I believe they have built enough of a brand that no matter the damage from this, it would be attractive to buy at a discount. Comments on last week's podcast with importer Raj Sabharwal, Peter Sprunger posted this. Hi Mark, great podcast as usual. Juan Cruz and I visited a couple of distilleries over the weekend. One distillery said they were sitting on 500 used barrels that would normally be exported to Scotland. The tour guide blamed export tariffs and uncertainty in the market. It got me thinking about other knock-on costs beyond the tariff on the whiskey itself that will make imported whiskey costs go even higher. And Hugo Dart added this, Raj Sabharwal summarized the entire Trump tariff war perfectly when he said, quote, it doesn't make basic economic sense to do this. You don't have to be a major whiskey importer to realize he's absolutely right. If you have a comment, question, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and join the conversation. You can also find us on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. During the news, I mentioned new Mizunara oak finished expressions from Suntory and Glengoyne, and that leads to the question, how did Mizunara oak become so popular? Well, you can credit or blame World War II. Before the war, Japanese whiskey makers generally relied on used American barrels. When the supply of casks was cut off during the war, the Japanese switched over to using their homegrown Mizunara oak. That's despite the problems Mizunara oak poses. The wood itself is less dense and more porous than American white oak, leading to problems with leaks and a higher Angel's share from evaporation. It also has a strong, distinctive aroma that can clash with the flavors in a whiskey at first. Over time, that aroma turns to touches of sandalwood, coconut, vanilla, and spice. It also grows very slowly, taking 200 years to reach a point where casks can be made from a single tree. That means Mizunara oak is more expensive as well. Casks can start now at $6,000 each, compared to $800 or so for new American white oak barrels. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store, or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Crafted with time, shaped by nature, perfected by generations. From Yamazaki to Hibiki to Hakushu, every drop of House of Suntory whiskey is a reflection of where it comes from. House of Suntory, this is Japanese whiskey.
Enjoy responsibly. Suntory Whiskey Single Malt and Blended Japanese Whiskey. 43% alcohol by volume. Copyright 2025 Suntory Global Spirits Import Company, Chicago, Illinois.
There's something special about opening a bottle of Dewar's 12-year with the people who matter most. It brings out the stories, the laughter, and the kind of moments you don't plan, but never forget. Built on tradition, made for right now, and best when shared. Dewar's 12-year-old.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.